Hey everyone, this is John from EastCoastArmory.com and I'm here today with a model showcase video for this caricaturized Porsche King Tiger heavy tank. The model in this video is built for my own personal collection. It's not for sale and or purchase. However, like I often mention in these build videos, I frequently take on commission build projects from models ranging between 1/35th scale and 1/6 scale. Although this vehicle here is slightly outside of that scope, if anyone is interested in having a vehicle built to the specs that you see it here, I can be reached through the following email address listed below, which is info@eastcoastarmory.com. This model here is built, well, quite literally out of the box. Hardly, if any, modifications were made to the basic build to bring it up to the condition that you see it here. However, there are some aspects of this build that I do want to touch upon, as well as give the model a thorough in-box review. So stay tuned because there's going to be a lot of info and content coming your way. To start this video, let's go ahead and take a quick walk around this model. If you're watching this and you're a frequent viewer of the channel, then you know what time it is. It is April 1st, making this video part of the April Fool's Day War Toons tank builds that are a common tradition found on the ECA channel. War Toons is an online video game that has a very unique art style where everything are in these weird, wonky, cartoony type proportions. A number of years ago, the model company Meng decided to release a line of kits from this video game. What's interesting is that they brought over the cartoonish type art style to these kits. What makes these kits unique is that they have the look and the feel of the vehicle in question, and in this case a Porsche King Tiger, but the proportions are all out of whack and makes for a very unique little model kit. Now this game isn't something that I play or even have downloaded on my computer, so I don't really know how the gameplay is or anything, but I will say that the game has been around for a number of years and must have some kind of popularity to it because the War Toons lineup in kits is pretty vast and seems to be growing basically almost yearly. One thing that I find that's pretty cool is that, like myself, you don't necessarily have to be a fan of the video game in order to appreciate the art style found on the model kits themselves. Before we go any further with the video, let's go ahead and take a step back to when the model was first started to get a good idea on what the base starter kit supplies you with. And here's the model at the start of the build. For the base starter kit, I'll be utilizing this Meng War Toons Porsche King Tiger heavy tank model. This model here was released by Meng, I want to say in 2017 or so, and it was actually one of the first lineup of kits that were released by Meng for the War Toons lineup. The other two, if I'm not mistaken, are the M4A1 Sherman and I believe the T34 and maybe the Tiger 1. Oddly enough, of those models I just mentioned, all of those I've built examples of, and you can find videos on all of those models on the ECA channel. Just like with the other War Toons tanks, this model here is all comprised of injection molded plastic components, with the exception of the track, which are single piece vinyl, which you will see once I crack the box open. Starting with the graphic design, here you can see the artwork of the caricaturized Porsche King Tiger. The quality of the illustration is actually pretty good, which is typically seen on the other Meng War Toons lineup of box arts. The remainder of the graphic design is standard on all the other War Toons kits. I believe on my Sherman it's actually brown, and at some point they switched it to this black color palette, but the layout is exactly the same. We have the Meng logo, the kit number, the War Toons logo, this little gear-shaped object, as well as the other verbiage right here on the front. One interesting feature that I like to mention about these War Toons box arts are with these vertical lines. You see, if you take one or two of these kits and put them together, they create this continuous banner that you see here. This was intended for a retail type setting where if you're in a store you can have all the kits lined up and it makes for a nice little presentation. Another advantage that this has is that if you have a number of these kits in your collection, you can have them displayed with the box arts to create an interesting display piece. With the other models moved out of the way, we can continue with the remainder of the graphic design. Notice on this panel here, it's empty, and this would change on later releases of these kits, where like on this Panzer III over here, you would have an illustration of what the model would look like with its profiles. On the older King Tiger kit here, that's not the case. Here we have I believe the game developer, which is Rookvan, or I hope I'm pronouncing that appropriately, as well as some verbiage. Side panels, same type of format, which is seen on the other models. And on the back here, we just have some snippets of in-game renderings, as well as a nice little advertisement here for the video game. The vehicle is Olga approved, for what that's worth, and we have the remainder of the verbiage and other corporate information written down. This model here is still relatively easy to come by. I picked this one up from Amazon.com for about 19 bucks or so, which is the running rate for these World War Toons models. They tend to fall into that price range. This one, though, I believe is a little bit harder to track down compared to some of the newer releases. But having said that, though, you could easily track them down on places like eBay or just with a simple Google search. It should yield some pretty decent results. Cracking open the box, all of the World War Toons models open up with a side opening flap, which is something that's relatively unseen on most model kits, but for the World War Toons ones, that's not the case. Just like with all the other World War Toons models, the entire kit's contents are sealed in this bag right over here. I'm going to go ahead and crack it open so we can get to see the kit contents are without the cellophane getting in the way. Okay, with all the parts dumped on the table, you get to see what they look like now. This kit here, all of the plastic components are in this dark Panzer Gray type coloring. On some of the other German tanks in the lineup, namely the Tiger and the Panther, the plastic was a Dunkelgelb coloring. Here you can see the runner up close. This one is clearly the running gear, as well as a few other odds and ends. Very basic, but again, for what this vehicle is, are more than suffice for the job at hand. Just like with many other kits out there, the runner containing the running gear comes in a set of 2s. Same type of quality molding. The quality molding is really good. You know, as beyond the cartoonish aspect of the model, this is a modern era model kit, and so it's made with some very good technology, and the molding quality is top-notch, which is what we would expect from a company like Meng. Here you get to see this other runner here, which consists of some other components, namely the gun barrel. Note on this model here, the gun barrel is a single-piece molding, unlike vehicles, I believe on the Tiger one, which was a 2-piece barrel assembly. On this one here, you're not going to have to worry about a seam to really contend with. We also have the mantlet and some sections of spare track, along with a cartoonized tow cable. Next runner is the turret. Note the way the vehicle was characterized. It has this geometric type format to it, which of course, as we all know, on the real Porsche Tiger, this was nice and curved, which is one of the aspects of the erroneously named Porsche turret that I always liked. But you still get the look and feel of the vehicle, which is kind of the point. Here we have the exhaust manifolds. Again, the same type of cartoonish art style. Carrying on, the tracks, I'll touch upon those momentarily. This runner here consists of the upper hull, the rear plate, as well as some other components, like tools and tow cables and whatnot. Note on the rear plate here, the rear mud flaps are integrally molded in, which does simplify the build quite a bit. And here we have the upper hull. It looks like they put the anti-aircraft guards over the rear grille work, which is a cool feature. The side skirts are integrally molded on. This is something that can possibly lead to issues, specifically with the way I like to build them. If you've seen the Pershing build-through video that I posted along with this one here, you'll see how I contend with something like this. And this build here, I'm probably going to use a similar technique. But other than that, the model, again, looks to be decently rendered. One thing I noticed right off the bat is the size. This model here is considerably larger compared to the other World War Toons tanks that I've built so far. I've built the Porsche Tiger, the Pershing, and the Tiger 1, and all of those are, you know, pretty chunky little builds, but this one here I believe is bigger compared to the others. On the very bottom here we have the lower hull. It's a one-piece molding, which is typical for these World War Toons vehicles other than the Sherman. And it has the look and the feel of the King Tiger, definitely. Nice, strong, thick plastic moldings for these pieces, which is another staple on these kits. They're nice and durable when you build them. And yeah, again, I'm not seeing any problems here. We have a little straggler, which is clearly the front machine gun blister. Pretty sure the gun can pivot on this one, which we'll see once the model is built. And that now brings us to the non-polystyrene components, which involve a little spread here of rubber polycaps, probably for the sprocket and the idlers, if I could take a guess. And here we have the main tracks. Just like on the other World War Toons models, the tracks are a literal single-piece vinyl molding. We have some interesting thread pattern detailing molded into the face. And there is this generic-looking tooth guide ribbon that's found here on the inside. It does have the look and feel, though, of a King Tiger track, which is, again, the whole point of this model here. These tracks, I've had some really good results with them on the other builds, and I'm not, anticipating any other problems on this build here whatsoever. So, and then at the very bottom of the box, we have a set of water slide decals. These decals, again, just like I've mentioned in other videos, are always nicely done. The printing on them is done with state-of-the-art technology, so the quality on the decals should be more than suffice for this build. Finally, this takes us to the instruction booklet. And if anyone's ever seen the other World War Toons builds, it's in the exact same type of format. We have these really nice type graphic design here on the inside. And the layout is all with these colorized CAD drawings. It's actually really nice, specifically if you're used to building models like I do that just have just a line drawing or two, even CAD or most of the time sometimes hand drawn depending on the age of the build. And having something like this with this type of showmanship is it's one that is definitely appreciated. But as for the build itself, you can see here it's very, very straightforward, and the build should go together fairly easily. Although I am going to be going out of order with some of the assembly due to the wheels and the track installation, because with the way I build my models, with the way I do my hulls. Again, more information on that is discussed in the M26 Pershing build-through video that has also been posted on the channel. Yep, that's basically it. So, with all this out of the way, let's cut across to when the model's finished, and I could go over some of the aspects of this build. Starting with the model suspension, all the stock components were utilized, but some tweaks were made to the sprockets as well as the idlers. Because the upper and lower hulls I pre-assembled before the assembly of the road wheels, the pegs which emit from these sections here were going to cause a problem with installing the sprocket and the idler. Obviously, you have to try to bend around the tin work over here, which is a bit problematic. So the idea that I had was I snipped off the molded in pegs and I drilled out the locations. I then went ahead and inserted a steel shaft on both the sprocket as well as the idler wheel. Basically, when the tank was fully painted, I would put the track on first and then slip on the sprocket and the other to their appropriate locations. The axle has a small drop of glue on them, so once the glue sets, both of these units are permanently fixed to the model, but the piece can actually still pivot like it did originally. I was able to have mixed results with this setup. On this side here, the unit went together according to plan without any problems. However, the problem arose on this portion that we have here. During the assembly, the sprocket went on pretty well, but the idler ran into a big problem. When I was trying to finagle and get the piece into place, I put a little bit too much force on the side skirt here, and the entire side skirt ripped right off of the model. To make matters worse, the model was already pre-painted, pre-weathered, and even pre-varnished at this point, to which, well, needless to say, I wasn't very happy. And by shearing off, I literally mean from this point all the way up to here, basically ripped off. The crack went diagonally, dividing this piece of fender directly in half. Now, I didn't exactly panic. I mean, don't get me wrong, I was pissed, but I didn't panic. What I went ahead and did was I assembled the remainder of the running gear according to plan. After the sprocket and the idler were on, the inner row wheels and the outer row wheels were then mounted in place as per the kit. The side skirt was then re-glued to the side of the hull. Once the unit dried, I then went ahead and started going through the repair process. First, that would entail was to delete the seam that was now present where this fender here was ripped in half. This was done with some super glue, a little bit of sandpaper, and I was able to polish it away to the clean state that we have here. The crack even went ahead and ran up to this little segment here on the tin work, so a little bit of body work was required to make it all blend in. Luckily, the remainder of the tin work didn't crack off in any really serious location, so I was lucky in that regard. And the crack basically ran along the natural seam found where the side skirt makes contact with the hull. Once the bodywork was concluded, I then went ahead and meticulously went through the process of painting that I used to apply the main camouflage. The dark yellow was reapplied, the same green was reapplied, and then I went through the various weathering techniques that I used before, but granted, localized in this section over here. Probably the biggest hurdle was to prevent any overspray from going on the cross, which was present on the vehicle at the time. Once all the paint and weathering was added, a coat of varnish went on, and everything is the way you see it here, which, needless to say, I lucked out because it went for a pretty seamless result. The reason why I'm going ahead and telling everyone this is because if I was to do this build again, I would have done it a different way. Rather than assembling the suspension after the model's pre-painted and weathered, I probably would have followed the instructions where I would have assembled the suspension on the tank along with the track and then completed accordingly. However, to do this does require the caveat that you know how you're going to paint the model. The reason why I say this is because the lower hull, the running gear, need to be pre-painted with the camouflage that you're going to be going with, so that once the model heads off into paint, you just mask these areas off, and then you can paint the model accordingly. Oddly enough, this technique is slightly similar to what you see on my 1/6 scale builds, where I pre-paint and weather the lower hull components, fit them to the model, and then just mask them up during the model's construction. A similar technique can also be done on some of the 1/48 scale Bandai King Tiger variants that are out there. If we recall from the other video that I did a number of years ago, that kit has a feature very similar to this where they molded on the side skirts to the upper hull. That kit too would run into the same problem I ran here. However, the difference between the two is that on the Bandai kit, the single piece track is a component that you actually have to bend and secure together via 2 tabs. This track here is a bit different. With the other track, I'm able to snake it through the sprocket and the remainder of the running gear, and then just connect it at some point on the bottom and hide it underneath the road wheels. With this one here, that's a bit problematic because the track is integrally molded as one continuous piece. Because of that, that technique that I mentioned before is just not possible. So basically, in a nutshell, you better have a paint and camo pattern already planned out ahead of time so that you could pre-paint everything accordingly and pre-install it along with the track, and then you can progress with the remainder of the build. If you go ahead and do that, your build will have a lot less problems going for it. Aside from the running gear, the remainder of the build went by pretty much effortlessly. All the details you see here are stock out of the box. The one things I do want to mention is that when you're painting and weathering the tools, these claws over here are integrally molded to the model. So during the weathering phase, you just want to highlight them with some of the paints that you're using to weather the remainder of your equipment. In this case here, I used the same technique that I used on the exhaust manifolds in order to get that rusty, grimy look that you see on these pieces. Moving up takes to the antenna and the antenna base. The one you see here is the kit supply one. However, it's a little bit different compared to the way it was during the original kit offering. You see, all the World War Toons models that have antennas on them, they have this type of a format where they mold the wire into the antenna base. A few other models do this, and if you ever watched my other videos, you'll know that this is not a feature that I generally like. The problem with this type of format is that the pieces are very fragile, and to make matters worse, this type of detailing here is one that's very prone to getting snagged and breaking. And the problem is when they break, you really can't fix them. It's because of this why on my other builds I tend to remove them completely and replace them with a metal wire. However, on my World War Toons models, I keep the plastic antennas because they are a bit chunky and doofy and work with the subject matter at hand. For this one here, this is no exception. However, during the construction, the top portion over here did break off during assembly. However, I decided to leave it in this quarter mass format that we have here. Again, for this subject matter, in my opinion, it works. For the piece itself is painted in my usual format where the wire is painted black. There's a slight little swipe of gold paint over here, and then the bottom portion is painted with rubber black. And of course, if anyone is wondering why, this is how the real German antenna bases would have been. The bottom is rubber, there's this brass extension point, and then the antenna simply plugs into it. Moving further takes to the fuel tank filler spout. Just like on many of my builds, I added the spilt fuel stain in this section. It's a quick, easy way to give a little pop to your model. Moving along takes to the tool, starting with the gun cleaning staves. The component here is the stock unit, and In order to just make it pop a little bit more from the kit original, I took a swipe of gold paint and added to the front and rear portions that we have here. Of course, on the real King Tiger, and all the German tanks for that matter, the cleaning safes are actually wooden rods, and the end connectors are made from brass fittings. In order to make any German tank model pop, all you gotta do is paint the middle portion with a brownish wood type coloring, and just with a quick little swipe of gold on either end will give you the look. The remainder of the tools were added as per the kit. The one thing that I do want to mention, and this is true for this kit as well as with the other kits in the World War Toons lineup, is that many of the equipment that plugs into their corresponding locations, the fit on these pieces are very, very snug. So snug, in fact, that you can actually damage and or break the component during the assembly. In order to thwart this, I like to either enlarge the holes that are found on the model. This is best done when the hole is a circle, so you can just take a wider Dremel bit or a router bit of some sort and slightly enlarge these pieces. With the material removed, the piece will fit in place with much ease. On other components that have a blade type installation, this is done with a needle file where I go ahead and I just remove about a material on either side of the peg with the needle file on the component. Once this is done, just like with the hole, the piece will slide into place with less effort, which will also minimize the risk of damage. On the front portion here, it takes to the bow machine gun. Just like with all of these plastic model kits, the machine gun is molded solid, and with a pin vise with a really small Dremel bit, I went ahead and added this small little hole. Just like I frequently mention, if you do not have a pin vise or the appropriate size bit for this, you might want to omit this procedure altogether because it's an easy way to potentially ruin your stock part. Moving up to the turret, all the components that you see here are stock with the model and are assembled as per the instructions. One nice feature this kit has is a functional loader's hatch. The piece just snaps directly into place, and one thing I like about this design compared to some of the other World War Toons kits is that the hinge is completely sealed through and through, which means that the piece will have a harder time in popping out. On many of the other kits, the hinge is a C-type hinge where the piece then just snaps into. It does work, but if you've seen my other videos, you'll see that the piece has a bad habit on being fairly loose, and it's easily something that can pop out. This design here, it's one of the better designs that I've seen on the World War Toons kits. The commander's cupola itself is non-functional, and the detailing you see here is static. Moving our way forward to the gun and the manlet, nothing much to talk about here. The components were all stock and were nicely engineered. They went on without any problems. On the barrel, because of the way it's molded, there is a slight little ridge found where the two mold halves meet, and this was simply polished away with a little bit of fine sandpaper. Once this is done, it leaves for a seamless look that we have here. Moving our way to the paint and the markings, the model's camouflage scheme is your late pattern German octopus or bubble pattern. It's a dual tone camouflage pattern that is painted in my usual format. The blotches themselves are airbrushed on, and the little bubbles themselves are added via a paintbrush. For the model's weathering, I went with my typical format with washes and dry brushing in order to achieve the look that you see here. For the model's decals, all of the waterslide decals were utilized on this build and were added to the locations which were recommended in the instructions. Just like with the other World War Toons kits, the decals are a really good quality. They are made with modern printing technology, so they had absolutely no problems transferring from the paper to the model, and then once everything was varnished in place, they make for a nice appearance that we have here. At the end of the day, I'm really happy in how this build turned out. These World War Toons builds are always an enjoyable experience to work on, and this kit here was no different. Yes, I did run into a little bit of friction with the track like I mentioned before. However, once everything is all said and done, this vehicle here is going to be a nice welcome addition to my collection. Sliding us into skill level and recommendations, this model here is a very easy model to work on and can be built by just about anybody, from the novice and beginner all the way up to the expert and advanced. Not to mention anyone else in between. Because of their subject matter, these models here can be built as conservative as you want with the out-of-the-box components, or you can go on the opposite end and super detail, scratch build, and customize to your heart's content. To assist in this, the models are relatively easy to come by and are also relatively affordable when found. For recommendations, obviously, because of the subject matter, if you're a fan of the video game, you're going to absolutely love all of the kits in the World War Toons range. These models are very collectible, and again, once you start building a few of them, it's not too hard to amass quite a collection of them. These models here are also recommended for anyone who's a fan of German World War II armor, or if you're just an aficionado of the King Tiger. It's a nice, unique subject matter to add to your collection, and it's one that makes for an interesting conversation piece. These models here also make really good gifts. If you know someone who's a model tank fan and who, you know that they already have an extensive collection of plastic model kits, but want to give the person that already has everything something new, one of these kits here is a nice little way to do that. On top of that, if you know someone in your life that's trying to get into plastic models, one of these kits here is a nice little welcome mat into that hobby. And with that, that wraps up this model showcase video for this caricaturized Porsche King Tiger tank. If you like this video, be sure to subscribe to this channel, where it's a great way to keep up to date on new posted content, being model showcase videos like this fellow over here, or the other larger model project update videos that frequently get posted to this channel. Another way to keep in loop of new posted content is by liking us on Facebook. There, I have more photographs of this particular build, as well as the other smaller and larger scale builds that are showcased on this channel. Furthermore, don't forget to swing by eastcoastarmory.com for more 1/6 and 1/16 scale builds and detailed components. Thanks again. I'll be catching you guys again on the next one. Take care.